Landlords TV, a production of Landlords New York. This is L&T Time with Michelle, the show where you get to have a cup of tea with me, Michelle Morato-Itkowitz, and we talk about an area that I've been practicing law in New York City for over 20 years, and that is landlord and tenant real estate issues. So today I am honored to have as my guest Landlords New York member David Goldoff, who is the principal of Camelot Realty.
Yes.
So let me do your bio here. So your earliest memories are being a gopher for your father and his brother as they're developing buildings. You're running in and out of the construction trailer on actual development sites in New York City. This is where you got your foundational real estate education.
Yes.
But you kind of wanted to pull away and be, nurture your creative side. So the .com craze, advertising, you went to NYU, you ended up managing in real estate, and when you got out, the family business said, please, David, manage for us, and that eventually becomes Camelot. Good?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about growing up in New York City real estate. And what I thought was interesting in our conversation earlier was the difference between what you learned doing and what you learned in school.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Thank you. Nice meeting you finally. I started working for my family in about 1999, working first in the advertising field. And I think the best experience that I had was every day was different versus being in a classroom setting. And for me, being in the advertising world, you get to place resources and see something start from the very beginning to the very end. I was a producer. So unfortunately, during the .com time, companies came and went quickly. I was out of a job. I needed to pay my rent. I lived in a building that my family owned. And I said, I'll do anything to stay in the apartment. Don't kick me out. They said, why don't you take your creative skills and fix up this apartment that's coming up to become vacant.
Was it rent stabilized?
It was rent stabilized at the time. I knew nothing about this stuff. I really had not ever gone into real estate before. So this was new, but I liked to take on challenges. And I thought it'd be really creative and fun to try to take on learning about what they do finally, now that I had the time. So given the budget, I told them to trust me. They did. I think I shocked them when they saw what I actually spent on fixing up the apartment, dealing with DHCR, dealing with the leases, the process of deregulating an apartment. I made a lot of mistakes. I probably could have spent less, but the end result was a brand new apartment that rented for probably about 5 times than what they were making. And in the end, I think they were, somewhat pleased with the results.
Because they had a different management style then. They
did.
had more the old timer, I'm not going to put $30,000 into an apartment to deregulate it kind of attitude.
That's right. Keep things fluid, keep things status quo, and no new ideas is okay until someone came up and said, maybe you should look at it differently. And I looked at it like, this is a time where I think the age of technology was really fresh and new, and I was coming out of that industry, and I thought that I could apply what I've learned there, especially in an industry where I felt it was, from my perspective, sort of stagnant and only one way of thinking.
That is so true.
Yeah.
The new generation, I just see it. It's a totally different way of approaching things. And as we spoke about what you do, you actually really are very unique in the sense that through your management, you really don't do one type of management. You've had your hands on everything. Rent stabilized buildings, luxury buildings, I'm going to actually look at my card for this one, co-ops, condos, development, financing, international owners. You work on a lot of co-op conversions. You've done receiverships, pension funds. That's really all over the place. That's a lot of experience. And you're pulling a lot of ideas from a lot of different places. And I think that's kind of gives you a unique perspective.
Yeah, it does. It's a lot of work, but basically the challenge is what I find attractive as the game. To me, not that the business is a game. We're there to do and what we're asked to do, and hopefully it's positive and it makes results, but it is a challenge. So I had a lot of great opportunities thrown my way. Usually there were ideas that needed help to get to the finish line, and some of the approaches that we use help get there for people. and a lot of the challenges are based on experiences and finding things that maybe can shortcut doing it the older way or more traditional ways. Technology is part of it. Also looking at things a little bit differently than you might usually. And
do you have another example of how your father and your uncle would have handled things versus how you do? That's not just technology.
To put it lightly, they did things until they really had to do it. I tried to look at things at a different approach where we address things a little bit head on.
Proactive.
A little bit more proactive. I think they came from more of a ownership perspective where they didn't really want to rock the boat unless they really had to, and use the purse strings unless they really had to. And for me, a little money spent was a lot more gained if it was applied right.
So how do you deal with your clients? Do you try to meet them where they're at? Like if you're dealing with family ownership where the older generation is still in control, do you try to meet them in a different place, or do you try to pull them along like you pulled your own family?
I think there's a little similarities to everything. I go and meet people. We do the email thing and we set up our calendars and we make sure that we're all in the same place and where we're going. Usually we're not late. But it's really, everyone needs a little push, and they're kind of looking for a direction. They're looking for someone like me to give them insight so that they feel confident that they're with somebody who's a professional. And I think that I've learned early on that if you can guide people, I'm also learning too. So when I meet somebody, I tend to listen. I'm a little quieter, but I tend to listen. And my actions are really in my performance, what I do for people. We try to come up with solutions that make sense, that are efficient. We try to come up with ways that are budget mindful, and we try to execute it, that get results. So we listen, and then we kind of find out what they need and execute it. And so far, it's done pretty good.
This is great stuff. Could you stick around while we go to the teaching segment?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we're on to the teaching segment. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the effect of the landlord's corporate status on a landlord and tenant case. So, if the landlord is a corporation or an LLC, as they often are, every corporation and LLC files with the Secretary of State and pays franchise tax. So, let's say a corporation or an LLC goes for a while and they don't pay their corporate franchise tax. What happens is eventually you'll get warned, and eventually the Secretary of State will involuntarily dissolve the corporation or the LLC. It will get eliminated. So this is Tax Law 203A. So now, what happens if that's the case? Well, a lot of things happen, but in the landlord and tenant context, what happens is, in any litigation context actually, a corporation that's been dissolved can't sue. They are not allowed to avail themselves of the New York State courts. Now, it's a little confusing because a corporation that's been dissolved is allowed to do some suing, but it's only allowed to do suing that will wrap up its affairs. It can conduct business to the extent that it's wrapping things up, getting things done. But it's been held, as specifically in the mortgage context, that if monies become due during the period when the corporation is dissolved, that's really the corporation doing new business. So that new business, if you want to sue on it, you can't avail yourself of the court system if you're not in good standing. So that's the problem. And when I work for a landlord or when I work for a tenant, the first thing I do is I always check the status of all the parties with the Secretary of State. It's very easy. You just go on the Secretary of State's website, you type in a word or two in the corporation's name, and it'll bring it up. So now, if you have this problem, how do we fix it? It is fixable. So a landlord can merely put their case on hold for a little bit, file the paperwork, pay the back franchise taxes. I assume there's going to be some extra fees, maybe late charges, and that can get done. So why strategically would a tenant ever do this to a landlord? Well, if you have a tenant who knows they're leaving and who is trying to string things out and draw things out, and if for the tenant the game is about buying as much time in a rent-free posture, then this could be a very nice trick in a tenant's bag of tricks. And as I've said, it's not something I see every day, but I've definitely seen it. So it's important to stay on top of making sure your corporate franchise taxes are being paid, and that in that sense, everything is good and it will make for a good landlord and tenant case. David, thank you so much for hanging around for my teaching portion. Would you be interested in coming back sometime and giving us some more feedback?
I would too. I would love to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you're watching Landlords TV, a production of Landlords New York, and this has been L&T Time with Michelle.